Today I want to go over the reverse banded bench press. And you could do a lot of different exercises in the cage with the bands. We've got them hooked up at the top and then connected to the bar. So the lower the bar goes, the less weight will be felt, and the higher the bar moves, the bands go slack, and they give you less and less help. So easy at the bottom, hard at the top. Very simple concept. But what we're going to do with it, and the only thing I ever did with the bands, is a competition grip bench press. And the reason I chose that is because the bands sort of take the place of, they're an ersatz shirt. They make it easy at the bottom, just like the shirt does when it tightens up, and hard at the top because they go slack, and the shirt doesn't help at the top either. So what this allowed me to do was to get into my competition positioning on the bench, take a competition grip, and without putting the shirt on, that becomes quite a bit of work and nonsense if you ask me. But you just lay down and do the job. And I only did doubles and singles. I don't think I ever did more than 3 reps this way, because this was practice for competition bench with gear. I still think this can be useful for tricep work for guys without gear, and we'll talk about that in a second, but this is what I used it for, and that's my reasoning, because it would take the load off of the shoulder. And that was super valuable to me, because I did this exercise, even though it was exactly the same as my competition bench press, I did this on tricep day. Because these bands, and you can get bigger or smaller bands, and make it as easy for yourself as you want. I mean, I've seen 315 pounds hanging, suspended, with just the bands. That's how much band tension some guys use. I've seen 315 not make it to the chest, and guys have to pull it. So that's probably too much band tension. These are the very same bands that I used to use. These are them. These are the bands. And this is all I used. And it was enough. It was enough. It took enough pressure off the bottom to save my shoulders, and they go slack. You can actually see them when she extends up. You can see the bands. They go from being nice and straight to kind of loose and floppy. So there's the rationale for using this in that way. You can use this for a close grip bench, or you could use this for lots of different things. But I've explained why I used it and how I used it. And I think that this has some benefit, even if you're a raw bencher, because man, does this load those triceps right where you need it. Now, I didn't do too much of this because the bands accelerate the bar. The bench shirt doesn't actually accelerate the bar, it just takes pressure off. And the acceleration comes from like tissue leverage and recoil. This is actual elastic recoil, and when that band stretches down to her chest, it will actually start to accelerate the bar up. But the acceleration isn't constant. As the bands go slack, they add less acceleration. And that's what you end up feeling. You feel that it gets harder. But what they're doing is they're giving less help, but they're also slowing down as they become slack. So they're the fastest when they're stretched the furthest. And then they had this weird lessening of acceleration. And so I didn't like to do too much of this because I think it can corrupt your actual form and timing. But a little bit of it, especially when, and this is when I used it, when my shoulders were hurting. It was a good substitute for tricep work as opposed to JM presses or close grip benches or floor presses with the chains. I did a lot of those. I love the chains. But I learned to find a way to use the bands that helped. So let's take a look at this exercise. And what she's gonna do is just, why don't you do a double? I'm gonna lift it off to her. You'll see the bands stretch, and then watch what happens to the bands, and watch what happens to her effort as she gets to the top. Say 3.
2, 3. Yes.
All right. Just do 2. Bands are tight. Bands are loose. Bands are tight. Bands are loose. They're almost not touching. Rack. Take a rest and we'll do another. And then you can edit these out. Let's do a bunch of doubles so they can see. So on when you watch this, you can watch it as many times as you want. But some of the times, watch what happens to the bands. And some of the times, see if you can watch what happens to her effort level. She's working a lot harder at the top than she is at the bottom. Wouldn't you say? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing about this is, say 1, 2, 3.
One, two, three.
Do a double.
Yes.
Bands tighten up, give a lot of help. Bands tighten up, they accelerate, and then they just die out, and she's got to finish it. So here's some things that you should think about. I started an idea there and I forgot what I was going to say, but one thing is you can work on your own timing. I used this to get my timing right with the shirt because I knew that at a certain point in the motion, I was going to hit a wall. I was getting all this help, and the tendency when the bands are tight or the shirt is tight is to kind of go a little easy and let them take the load. And then when you really have to buckle down later in the rep, you kind of save it for that. That's the wrong attitude to take. So I'm going to have her do a set now where I tell her to go as hard as she can. Not as fast. It's not about speed. It's about force. So I don't even want her thinking about speed. I just want the most force. Now, that could translate into speed, but I never want to be thinking about speed. I always want to be thinking about force. Force, more force, more force, more force. If it helps you to think about trying to do it fast, I suppose that's all right. But it's not. It really doesn't work that way. Maximal lifts don't work that way. All your best maximal lifts go at a snail's pace, but you have to produce a lot of force. So here we know it's going to move faster at the bottom, so she's going to expect that. But what I want her to do is I want her to add and summate her normal amount of press as if this wasn't being helped. Let the bands help her, and then the top is sort of like a follow through, like a bike going down one hill and trying to get so much momentum that it makes it to the other side of the hill without having to do much. If you just coast down the one hill, you make it halfway up the other hill and then you're back down. But if you pedal as fast as you can down the hill, then you're going to make it up over that next hill. So this is about being at the bottom and trying to get over that next hill. Trying to push so hard when it's easy, when these are super, super tight, adding that your force to this force and accelerating all the way through the whole motion. So let's see what happens. Let's see what this looks like when she does that. By the way, she's never done this before, so she's learning this right along.
One, two, three. Yes.
All right, now when it's at the bottom, push it just like it wasn't helping you. Much better. So your force plus its force, and then finishing through. Nice. How'd that feel? Felt different, didn't it?
Yes.
And it felt different because you did something different. When you were just doing it in the beginning, you were feeling your way through this exercise, and you noticed what everybody feels. It's easy at the bottom. You don't have to work hard. But if you do work hard, you can put on even more weight.
I see that.
Yeah, and if you want to do that, we can. You want to do some more? Or is that enough? I'll just wrap it up.
You can wrap it up. It's fine.
Okay. All right.
It's not too long.
So you don't want to do any more?
I mean, I can.
You don't have to. You don't have to. I think I made the point there.
Yeah.
So you can consider putting these into your program they're not an essential thing, but if you enjoy using the bands and you use them for other things, this is the way that I found them to be most beneficial and to corrupt my form the least. Now, I think band work in general is terrible for powerlifters because they have live weight and that doesn't accelerate with the band. But for football players, athletes, working out, bodybuilders, bands are perfectly good because you don't have a skill that you're gonna be asked to perform in a specific motor pattern. If you're a football player, you're gonna use all kinds of pushes through the game. You might even fall down and have to catch yourself. If you're a wrestler, your arms are gonna be in all sorts of different positions and at all kinds of speeds. So it doesn't have to follow that law of sports specificity as the powerlifting does. So when you put bands on the other way and they let it be easy at the bottom because they're loose and then they get tighter at the top, they're actually slowing the bar down as you press up. If I attach these the other way, as I press up, the bands are actually becoming more and more resistive, and so you feel more what you think is weight, but they actually are slowing down. They're slowing you down. And then when you begin to come down, it's not just regular gravity. When you're locked out and you've got a band that's pulling you down, that band is gonna add to the speed of normal gravity. It's gonna accelerate, it's gonna speed the bar falling faster. And again, it follows the same law. It speeds the bar up quickest at the beginning, but then less and less. And so it can really feel wrong. You can get used to it, and I did. You know, I gave the bands a really good shot, but I didn't like the way that they didn't feel live weight does. And I think it's a danger if you do too much band work as a power lifter, unless you change the technique. So if you do close grip benches with bands, that's not going to corrupt your wide grip competitive bench press. So there's plenty of ways a power lifter can use bands on the top or on the bottom. Plenty of exercises you can do. I just wouldn't do them on the exercises that I have to compete at for fear of changing my timing. If I'm going to squat, then I want to practice my squat while I'm training. If I just want to get strong legs, I'll just go do leg press. I don't want to take the bands and put them on my squat and change the timing. And I tried to describe quickly, maybe I should do a band video soon, but I would use these sparingly, and this is how I use them sparingly. Now I use the bands for lots of my clients and lots of athletes. You know, you can do biceps, triceps, shoulders, leg extensions, hip extensions. I use bands all the time to do other things than the 3 power lifts, the 3 lifts that require skill. I don't think you will ever see an Olympic lifter put even the smallest, thinnest band on, because it's going to throw off their skill. And I understand that it's a pretty gross motor skill, pressing and squatting and deadlifting. I understand, but a skill it is still the same. And when you're at your absolute max and you miss a lift by that much, you're going to wonder, was my timing off? And I don't want to wonder. I want to do everything right, and I want to do everything by the laws of sports training. And one of those laws is the law of sports specificity. So I obey that law. And you probably should too. You might be able to get away with it, but I wouldn't do too much of it for fear of throwing your timing off. So I hope you enjoy this video, and thank you for listening. On a scale of 1 to 10, how do you think that went?